My name is Emma, where it all began. I remember the sunlight pouring through the lace curtains in my kitchen every morning. The way it bounced off the polished tiles, catching the dust in the air like a web of silvery threads. That's what my life felt like for years. Neat, orderly, and quietly beautiful. My name is Emma Westbrook. I'm 39, living in a peaceful cul-de-sac in Maplewood, a little town just outside of Princeton, New Jersey. If you asked my neighbors, they'd probably tell you I'm the luckiest woman on the block, with a 3-bedroom colonial, a well-manicured garden, and a husband who never forgot our anniversary. But here's my truth. Sometimes, happiness is nothing more than a carefully arranged display, a smile painted in the right shade for the right occasion. I grew up in small-town Michigan. My dad a librarian, my mom a watercolor artist. I'd always imagined myself ending up somewhere busy, like Chicago, or maybe even New York. Instead, love pulled me east. I met Alex, my husband, at a cousin's wedding when I was just 24. He had the sort of charm you can't bottle. Quick-witted, kind, and at the time, just a little bit broken. We married a year later, bought the Maplewood house, and promised to build a life as solid and cheerful as the yellow daffodils out front. Our daughter, Grace, was born not long after. Everything about her felt miraculous. The way her tiny fist curled around my pinky, her steady gaze as a baby, the wild tangles of her hair as she zipped down the hallway, giggling. I settled into the rhythm of motherhood, PTA meetings, bake sales, and lazy Saturdays at the town farmers market. Alex worked as an accountant for a medical supply company, gone from 9 to 5, sometimes longer. I prided myself on having a home that was always welcoming, the doors wide open to friends, the kitchen thick with the scent of banana bread or homemade chili. Even on days I was tired or lost, I told myself, this is enough. No, more than enough. But sometimes, late at night, I'd sit by the window, mug of tea cooling in my hands, watching the porch light flicker. Beneath my pride, a quiet ache pulsed, a feeling that something was missing, or maybe something was hiding. I kept it to myself, as so many women do. I played the role of the perfect wife and mother, letting my own needs slip further and further down the list. I made jokes about my predictable life, but inside I wondered if predictability was slowly turning into invisibility. Still, I loved my family. I loved this home, its soft yellow walls and creaky hardwood floors. I loved the life I'd built, even as I started to sense its cracks. What I didn't know, standing in my kitchen that bright autumn morning, was that the days of neat routines and easy certainties were about to shatter. My real story, the one I had never dared to imagine, was waiting right behind the door, ready to burst into light and shadow and test every ounce of strength I'd ever believed I had. Subtle signs. It was easy to convince myself, at first, that nothing was wrong. For years, I believed that ordinary worries, work stress, busy schedules, occasional distance, were all part of the ebb and flow of family life. Yet looking back, I can see how unease crept in quietly, moving into my days like an uninvited house guest. The first thing I noticed was that Lucas started coming home later. At first, it was once or twice a week, a late meeting, a work dinner, traffic on Route 128. He always had an explanation ready, usually delivered with an apologetic smile and a kiss on my forehead. I didn't question it. I was too absorbed in Harper's school projects and managing the never-ending list of things that needed doing. But as fall deepened, so did the frequency of his absences. Sometimes he'd walk through the door after midnight, claiming exhaustion, barely meeting my eyes. His phone became another stranger in our house, where he used to leave it charging on the kitchen counter. Now it was glued to his hand or stashed away in his jacket pocket. There were evenings I'd catch its faint vibration in the next room, then find him staring at the glowing screen, thumb moving quickly, before the device disappeared out of sight again. When I'd ask who it was, he'd shrug and say, "Just work. It's nothing." In hindsight, little moments flickered like warning lights. Lucas snapping at Harper for spilling juice, when once he would have laughed it off. Missed family dinners he'd always loved. A distant look in his eyes, even when he was present. One Sunday morning, he skipped our usual neighborhood walk, mumbling about needing to catch up on emails. I found myself standing alone on the porch, Harper tugging at my sleeve, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. I tried to rationalize everything. The longer hours, the distracted conversations, the short temper. We all go through rough patches, I told myself. Maybe he's just tired, stressed. Maybe I'm being too sensitive, reading too much into small things. Still, I started watching more closely. I lingered in the doorway when he took calls, listened for change in the tone of his voice. There was a pause one day, a slight stammer, when I asked about his upcoming business trip. "It's just a quick meeting in New York. I'll be back late." Something in the way his eyes darted to the floor made my heart skip. I wanted to push my worries aside, but in those quiet moments before bed, with Lucas already asleep and Harper breathing softly down the hall, anxiety gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the life I'd built so carefully, the trust I'd given so freely, was starting to slip beyond my grasp. And though I tried for weeks to banish those suspicions, the signs piled up, each one stacking atop the last, refusing to be ignored. Something was shifting. I just didn't know yet how deep the fault line would run. The shock of betrayal. If I close my eyes, I can still recall the exact moment the world I'd so carefully constructed shattered. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, no thunderstorm rumbling outside. The house was quiet in that unsettling way that happens just before everything falls apart. Grace was at a friend's for a sleepover, the dog snoring gently in the corner, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea, going over bills, and fighting the tension in my shoulders that had become all too familiar. I never intended to look at David's phone. I wasn't that kind of wife, or at least I believed I wasn't. The phone was there, face down on the counter, humming slightly against the stone. A message preview lit up the screen. "Thank you for last night. XO, Jess." The name hit me first. Jess, as in Jessica Carson, my closest friend since college, the godmother to my daughter, the woman who knew every story and secret I'd ever had. I felt like the ground had tilted under my feet, as if someone had opened a trapdoor directly beneath our kitchen. My hands trembled as I unlocked the phone, guided more by instinct than by intention. I scrolled through their messages, weeks of them, maybe months, each one a pinprick to my chest. Jokes, whispered plans, longing disguised as laughter, memories spun between them that had no room for me. Words I recognized as David's, but twisted, playful in a way I hadn't seen for years. There were photos, too, smiling faces, hands touching under the table I'd set for Sunday brunch, hidden references to hotel rooms and secret meetings. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears, and for a minute, I truly thought I might vomit right there on the kitchen tile. What does betrayal feel like? It's cold, yes, but it burns. The air seemed suddenly too thin. I watched myself from somewhere far away, like an actress playing the part of a woman whose life was splintering in slow motion. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to run out into the street and keep running until the world blurred behind me. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I sat back down, pressed shaking fists to my lips, and broke in ways I didn't know were possible. My best friend, my husband, the two people I had trusted most in my life, weaving a parallel story I hadn't been allowed to read. The next day, I tried to gather myself. David went about his routine, seemingly unaware that anything in our universe had shifted. He kissed my forehead, packed his briefcase, and left for work. I watched his car drive away, body numb, wondering how much of our life had been a performance. How many times I'd sat across from them both, laughing at jokes I didn't understand, oblivious to their secret glances. What parts of our history had been rewritten in private? I replayed conversations in my mind, all those little silences, those excuses, the times Jessica had canceled plans at the last moment, or David had come home smelling of her perfume. The sense of humiliation was suffocating. My trust, so casually broken, felt both monstrous and trivial. I blamed myself. Maybe I hadn't been enough, not attentive enough, not interesting enough, not beautiful enough. Or maybe I'd loved too much, too blindly, believing that loyalty was a shield against heartbreak. I called my sister that evening, my voice hoarse and brimming with tears I refused to let fall. "What do I do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure what answer I wanted. She listened, and for the first time, I let myself grieve in someone else's presence. It felt both terrible and relieving, like pulling a splinter from deep inside your skin. The days after my discovery blurred into one another. I played my part for Grace, determined not to let her world collapse along with mine. I packed her lunches, drove her to school, smiled when I needed to. Each moment was a marathon, each breath a labor. I avoided Jessica's calls and messages. I ignored David's attempts at small talk and affection. Inside, I was a hurricane, grief colliding with anger, betrayal swirling into a bitter resolve. I needed answers, not just apologies. Why had they done this? How long had it been going on? Was anything you'd told me true? But mostly, I needed to know what came next. There was a split in the road ahead. I could crumble, let this betrayal define me. Or I could find a way out, find a way through. I went through our bank statements, our calendars, piecing together a timeline, hunting for the overlaps. My pain gave me clarity. Every missed dinner, every spontaneous trip, every late meeting took on new meaning. Slowly, the reality took shape. I saw how expertly they had hidden things, weaving their own secret life right beneath mine. But with each moment of clarity, I felt a thread of steel winding its way through my insides. I wasn't just going to survive this. No, I would find out everything, dig up every secret, and make sure that what they had done would not be buried in silence or shame. My story wasn't over. In fact, it felt like the beginning of something entirely new, something fierce, something mine. Falling into despair, the days after my discovery blend together now in my memory. A thick fog of confusion, grief, and endless questions that looped in my mind like a broken record. I woke up every morning with a fierce hope that it had all been a nightmare, that I'd imagined Samuel's betrayal and Mia's whispered lies. But the reality awaited me, sharp and unrelenting, every time I looked in the mirror and saw the swollen eyes of a woman who hadn't really slept in days. I felt trapped, not just by circumstance, but by the weight of knowing and the impossibility of forgetting. I couldn't leave, not yet, not with Lily depending on me for stability and comfort. How could I explain to an 8-year-old that both her father and our closest family friend had blown our world apart. The ache of helplessness was suffocating. There were moments, the soft thump of Lily's feet running down the hallway, her giggle as she chased the family dog through fallen leaves, the innocent way she asked when Mia would visit again. That nearly broke me. How could I keep her safe in a house that suddenly felt hostile, an alien, haunted by secrets I was only beginning to uncover? I went through my days in a haze of disbelief. Conversations with Samuel were clipped, polite to the point of parody. He noticed, of course, but seemed too deep in his own web of guilt and lies to ask what was wrong. There were nights he tried to make amends in small ways, washing dishes after dinner, leaving a single rose on my dresser, offering to take Lily to piano practice. But I recoiled from his touch, afraid that if I let him close, I would burst under the pressure of all I was holding inside. I tried to confide in my sister, Amy, but the words stuck in my throat. The shame was overwhelming. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have let my world become so precarious without even noticing? The guilt curled up beside the pain, whispering that maybe I'd failed in some critical way, that perhaps I wasn't enough. Every memory became suspect. I replayed conversations I'd had with Mia, tried to decipher every laugh, every shared secret, every moment when she'd looked across the room at Samuel with an intensity I'd chalked up to friendship. I wondered how much of my marriage had been a lie, how many times I'd trusted blindly, blissfully unaware of the disaster brewing beneath my very roof. I started noticing other things too. The way Samuel would vanish into his office for hours, his phone calls quiet and urgent, the careful way he cleared his browsing history from our shared computer. Little inconsistencies that nagged at me, made me wonder if there was more to the story than just an affair. Was this the only secret they shared? Or was there a darker truth lurking under the surface? I kept circling back to this. If both Samuel and Mia could deceive me so completely, what else were they capable of hiding? Nothing felt safe or certain anymore. Each night, in the lonely silence after Lily went to bed, I paced the hallway, unable to stop myself from searching for answers in the faces of the people I'd once loved most in the world. But as the days stretched into weeks, something began to shift. My initial paralysis was slowly replaced by a simmering resolve. If I couldn't run, if I couldn't scream or confess or collapse, then I would investigate. I would find the truth, whatever it cost. I owed myself as much, not just for the sake of closure or revenge, but for the possibility of reclaiming my life from the wreckage. I realized I was at a crossroads, surrender to despair, or pick up the scattered pieces and fight back in the only way I knew how, with patience, attention to detail, and an unyielding determination to uncover every secret behind those closed doors, uncovering the darkness within my family. The weeks after my emotional collapse felt like stumbling through a dimly lit house, every familiar surface suddenly holding a shadow I'd never noticed. It was both terrifying and weirdly exhilarating. That push forward after the dam finally broke. I no longer had anything to lose, and that realization made me hungry for answers in a way I'd never felt before. Hurt, betrayed, suspicious, but also oddly alive, my senses sharpened by grief and anger. I started to look closer, peeling back layers I'd previously chosen to ignore. At first, I did what any desperate wife with a background in finance and too much late-night crime TV does. I started with the details. The little details most people assume go unnoticed by their spouse. Samuel's receipts, his late-night credit card charges, the nearly imperceptible changes in our joint bank statements. Like puzzle pieces scattered among the debris, each one threatened to fall through the cracks until I forced them into place. Why did he pay for hotels downtown when his office was less than 20 minutes from home? Who was the florist that kept showing up on our charge history when I never received a single bouquet? Why did his phone bills spike with long calls to a New York area code? I started keeping a notebook, a spiral-bound relic from my daughter Lily's elementary school days, tucked in my bag, hidden under a pile of grocery receipts and library cards. Every odd purchase, every unexplained absence got its own bullet point, its own date and time. I began tracking patterns. Samuel's supposed meetings always clustered around Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings. I noticed how tense he became anytime I mentioned family trips or suggested a weekend getaway, his eyes darting as if he were running mental calculations. Measures of risk I hadn't realized were part of our marriage. At some point, I began watching him more closely, not out of love, but out of self-preservation. I told myself I was protecting Lily, protecting our home, but the truth was simpler and more raw. I just needed to know. One rainy Friday, after dropping Lily at school, I followed Samuel's car as he left the driveway, heart pounding, hands sweaty on the steering wheel. I trailed at what I hoped was a safe distance. Every cliché from every detective novel echoing in my head. He didn't go to the office. He didn't go to a meeting. He drove 30 minutes across town, parked in a nondescript strip mall, and sat inside his car for nearly an hour, talking animatedly on his phone. I stayed just long enough to snap a few blurry photos on my phone and then drove home, unnerved and strangely empowered. That afternoon, sitting at our kitchen table, littered with Samuel's receipts and my own messy notes, I made the decision. I swore I never would. I looked for professional help. I hired a private investigator, an older woman named Marcia, in a windbreaker and jeans, with a laugh like gravel and surprisingly gentle eyes. The first time I met her, I couldn't stop shaking, as if admitting my suspicions out loud would somehow make them less real. Or worse, vindicate my darkest fears. But Marcia just nodded, jotting things in her little book, her questions clinical, but never cold. She didn't treat me like I was crazy, or irrational, or naive. She treated me like someone who deserved the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. Over the next weeks, Marcia pieced together a portrait of Samuel that both broke and fascinated me. She tracked his movements, analyzed his accounts, checked in with sources I would never have had access to. She was a magician with data, and soon she began delivering not just her theories, but the receipts to back them up, literal receipts, hidden account numbers, flagged transactions. I would sit with her in the dusty back booth of a downtown coffee shop, sliding folders across the table like a pair of secret agents. Each new detail made me feel both vindicated and ruined all over again. But the evidence she uncovered was even darker than an affair. Yes, there were the hotel rooms, the dinners, the gifts to Jessica, my former friend and the other party in Samuel's grand betrayal. But there was also money missing from his company's ledgers, funds funneled into shadowy shell companies. Email trails bloomed on Marcia's laptop, cryptic messages between Samuel and unknown contacts, sometimes involving Jessica's email account too. My stomach twisted with every revelation. This was not just about my broken heart. This was a criminal operation. I was living with a man capable of burying not only his emotional infidelity, but his moral compass deeper than I'd ever suspected. I started wondering how much of my entire marriage had been a series of well-manicured lies. Had Samuel always planned to use my financial acumen as a cover? Was Jessica drawn to me Because I was the one person who posed the least threat, hiding in plain sight while they routed their secrets through our friendship. The more I uncovered, the more disturbing the web appeared. Each strand connecting me to people I'd never met, places I'd never heard of, decisions that could ruin us all. My nights became anxious fever dreams, filled with numbers and faces and whispered threats. I began combing through our home office, finding post-its and code, USB drives labeled with innocuous names, concealing spreadsheets of laundered money, lists of aliases, and bogus addresses. Samuel, for all his arrogance, had grown careless in his double life. I wondered if he thought I was too broken-hearted, too exhausted by grief to notice. It was almost funny, the eternal underestimation of the wife. The strain of knowing each day what was truly going on grew heavier. Sometimes I would wake to the sound of Lily's laughter, her innocence, both a comfort and a sharp pain pressing against my chest. How could I shield her from the disaster barreling toward us? How could I protect myself, armed with nothing but clues and questions, when I'd become a stranger in my own house? When Marcia delivered the final, undeniable proof, a recorded conversation between Samuel and Jessica, plotting new banking maneuvers and laughing at how easy it was to hide things from gullible Emma. I felt something inside me harden. The tears were gone. My anger was cold now, focused and sharp. I understood, finally, that the only way forward was through fire. It was time to turn the secrets that had poisoned my life against their creators. Time to become the protagonist of my own story. Not just the dazed victim flipping pages. I collected everything I had: financial printouts, USB drives, emails, transcriptions, photos. I built my own case, armed not just with heartbreak, but hard evidence. The darkness that Samuel and Jessica created was real, but they'd forgotten one crucial thing. I was not just their collateral damage. I was the one holding the match, and soon I'd decide exactly how much truth to burn it all down with. Turn the tables. When you feel like life has completely unraveled, and you're nothing more than leftover pieces scattered from the blast, there's a strange calm that descends. That's what happened to me. The rage wasn't burning, guttural anymore. It was purposeful, glacial. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid or lost. I was steel. Maybe it was self-preservation. Maybe it was desperation masquerading as courage. But one rainy Tuesday morning, sitting in a house thick with secrets, I made a choice. I would stop being the victim. I would fight for myself and for Lily. The first step was organization. I set up shop at the dining table, the same table where Samuel and I had once eaten candlelit pasta and talked about our dreams. I laid out every scrap of evidence I'd collected in the last several weeks. Phone bills and bank statements, hotel receipts, emails, even grocery slips that didn't add up. I bought a thick spiral notebook and scribbled timelines, cross-checked Samuel's late nights with his mysterious credit card charges. There was grim satisfaction in this, cold comfort in the details, a sense of agency after months of powerlessness. I felt like a character in a thriller, coffee going cold at my elbow, hands stained with cheap ink, laptop buzzing in the dark. Sometimes, exhaustion would threaten to swallow me whole. But then, I'd look across the room at Lily's school photo and find a flicker of resolve, fresh as a slap to the face. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about setting my world right again, whatever it took. I wanted to confront Samuel immediately, even to scream, to demand explanations, to shatter the trembling facade of our home. But I knew that impulse would get me nowhere. Needed irrefutable proof. I needed a strategy, So I kept up the charade, playing dutiful wife, my smiles well-practiced, my silences hiding 1,000 thoughts. I woke up early to pack Lily's lunch, sat beside Samuel on the couch after dinner, watching the news, even made small talk about work and the neighbors. Inside, though, I was a detective, building my case, brick by careful brick. There were days I nearly slipped. Samuel would reach for my hand, and I'd have to suppress the urge to recoil. Sometimes he'd look at me with something like guilt, his expression drawn and restless. But the mask never dropped. That's the thing about people who deceive. They'll contort themselves until they snap, rather than let the truth spill out. The tension in the house was palpable, like the seconds before thunder splits the air. But I waited, patient as a spider. I started making copies of every important document, digitally and physically. I set up a password-locked folder on my laptop, a secret vault of misery and mathematics. Old Emma, the woman who accepted things as they were, was gone. In her place was someone who dared to probe, question, and prepare for the storm to come. At night, after Samuel was asleep, I'd tiptoe to the living room and call Marcia, the private investigator I'd hired. She guided me with the wisdom of someone who'd seen families rise and fall over secrets. You need a paper trail, she'd say. Banks, emails, texts. Prove where the money went and who was involved. And don't let on that you know. You only get the element of surprise once, Emma. So that's what I did. I played the long game. One afternoon, I followed Samuel to his supposed conference on the other side of town. Once again, he ended up parked outside a drab, beige office building I didn't recognize. Instead of confronting him, I jotted down the address and quietly took a photo of his car in the lot, time-stamped and dated. Some part of me, a part that had been meek and tired for too long, relished the gathering momentum. I was no longer searching aimlessly in the dark. I was building toward a grim, necessary climax. Collecting evidence became almost a compulsion. I intercepted emails, took screenshots, and saved every text message that might later be denied. If Samuel was careful, I was even more so. If he trusted in my gullibility, that only made me sharper. Let them underestimate you, Marcia would remind me. A wink in her voice that somehow made the loneliness feel less crushing. Slowly, a picture more intricate and damning than I'd feared came together. Fake invoices, phony business meetings, calls to Jessica's burner number, shell companies where our family's finances had quietly trickled away. There were lies stacked upon lies, a house of cards Samuel seemed to believe would never collapse. There was a point in the gray lull between desperation and action when my fear twisted itself into cold, determined calculation. What I was about to do would mean the end of my marriage, the destruction of Lily's image of her family, and the public outing of a web of lies whose reach extended far beyond our front door. But I couldn't turn away, not anymore. To do so was to be complicit, to accept that my life could be rewritten by someone else's deceit. I owed Lily and myself the truth, even if it scorched the earth around us. The day I brought my folder of evidence to the lawyer's office remains seared into my brain. My hands shook, but I walked in upright and made eye contact. The attorney's eyes went wide as she flipped through the documents, her nods small and approving. "Emma, this is more than enough to open an investigation," she said quietly. "You've built a formidable case. What followed was a blur. Consultations, affidavits, stark warnings about discretion and timing. We had to bring in the authorities. There was financial fraud involved, possibly criminal charges, and a trail of deception that could ruin more than just bank accounts. For days, I walked around the house in a tense kind of limbo, keeping up appearances for Lily's sake, each hour tighter than the last. The morning of the arrest was a blue, cloudless morning. One of those spring days that fill you with the illusion that nothing could go wrong. I dressed Lily for school, braided her hair with unsteady fingers, kissed her on the forehead, and sent her off with the bus. Samuel was in the kitchen, reading emails, his brow furrowed with faux seriousness. The knock at the door was almost anticlimactic. Uniformed officers, clear voices, the sound of cuffs clicking closed. Samuel didn't protest. He hardly looked at me. I think, in some way, he knew. Maybe he'd always known this was where things were heading, whether sooner or later. As the squad car drove away, engine rumbling down the cul-de-sac, I stood on the porch in my robe, staring into the light until tears blurred my eyes. The air felt cleaner than it had in years. I sat down on our porch swing, knees shaking, heart pounding hard, and proud and terrified. I had done it. I had turned my heartbreak into action. I had forced the truth out from the shadows. In the days that followed, I told Lily, as simply and gently as I could, that her father would be leaving for a long time. There were tears, so many tears, anger, confusion, the hard questions every child asks when the world goes on its side. I let her rage. I let her mourn, but I also let her see, little by little, that her mother could fight and win, even against the odds. The fallout from Samuel's arrest spread fast. There were headlines, whispers at the supermarket, awkward questions from neighbors whose own curtains concealed who knows what. I kept my head high as possible. I attended every meeting with lawyers, accountants, and social workers. I fought to retain our home, and most importantly, to keep Lily's sense of safety intact. Some days, the loneliness pressed on me, heavier than any grief from the betrayal. But there were also times, a sudden laugh from Lily, a friend's warm hand squeezed around mine, when I realized the worst had already happened and I was still standing. Above all, I learned that I am my own rescue. Strength isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply the refusal to lie down and let other people's choices determine your fate. As court proceedings dragged on, as the truth about Samuel unraveled even farther than I'd feared, I grew tougher. I learned to trust myself again. I learned that love, when twisted, can create darkness, but that surviving and confronting that darkness forges a lightness possible nowhere else. There's fear, yes, but there's also freedom in claiming the wheel of your life, no matter how battered it feels in your hands. The day the judge handed down the verdict was overcast and cold. Samuel, my former best friend, my greatest betrayer, and Lily's father, was sentenced. Justice meted by due process and not by anger. It wasn't the ending I'd once dreamed about, but it was the ending I needed. When I left the courthouse, I called Marcia and thanked her. I don't know how I would have made it here if you hadn't believed I could. She laughed, flicking away my gratitude with a gruff kindness. You did everything, Emma. You just needed the right push. That night, I stood in our quiet house, the house I'd saved, the one that had once been a prison and now felt like possibility. I poured a glass of wine, toasted my worn reflection, and promised myself that I would build a new life, not shaped by fear or secrecy, but by resilience and truth. This is what it means to take your power back. This is what it means to choose yourself, even after everyone else chooses lies. I had become more than the sum of my brokenness, and I would never again underestimate the fire in my own heart. A new Emma, a new beginning. Sometimes, the quiet that follows a storm can be the loudest sound in your life. That was how I felt in the weeks after the final judgment, caught between old wounds and the unsteady ground of a life waiting to unfold. It wasn't as if everything instantly healed. Ravenous feelings still gnawed at me. At odd hours, a pang of nostalgia when I passed our wedding photo, stacked in a half-packed box. An echo of loss when Lily drew a family picture with the eraser lines showing where her father used to be. But there was a kind of fragile peace in our house, too. And damn if I didn't cling to it every single day. After Samuel's sentencing, there was an immediate, almost dizzying realization. Every decision was now mine. The shock was thrilling and intimidating in equal measure. The inertia that had governed me for so long was gone. Insurance calls, mortgage negotiations, therapist appointments, dinner recipes, homework crises. All of these were up to me. Freedom, I learned, sometimes arrives, dressed as exhaustion. The early mornings became my time. No longer a stretch of hours to survive, but a space I could fill as I pleased. I started running again, first around the block, then farther each day. The cold air slicing through my lungs matched the briskness of my resolve. My legs burned, my heart hammered. It was familiar pain, but it was under my command. Sometimes I'd whisper, "You're okay," over and over as my sneakers pounded the asphalt. Some mornings, I broke into quiet tears as I ran, letting the pain and hope mix with the rhythm of my breath. For the first time since I'd set foot in Maplewood, I allowed myself to be a little bit selfish. I bought a small rosebush for the front yard. A riot of red petals Samuel would have called too flashy. I repainted the kitchen a pale teal. I put photos of Lily and me everywhere. I let myself laugh with my neighbors, and I let myself cry, too, when grief snuck up or loneliness sharpened the edges of the day. I invited friends over for coffee, even when the house was a mess. Some drifted away, uncomfortable with the scandal, or simply unused to the new boundaries I'd set. Others, unexpected allies, dropped off casseroles, awkward but kind wedges of support that reminded me some people show up only when the sky is darkest. Lily showed me the way in her own small, stubborn way. Children, I've learned, are heartbreakingly resilient. She would ask hard questions at bedtime, her brow furrowed, voice determined. Why did Daddy lie? Will things be happy again? There were nights I didn't have the answers. All I could do was hold her tightly, promise her that being sad didn't mean we'd always be sad, and that the two of us would always have each other. We baked cookies together, let dough splatter the counters, and flour coat our faces. We started reading a new book each month, our own secret club. And when darkness pulled at our thoughts, we'd take a flashlight walk in the yard, searching for fireflies or listening to the steady, reassuring sound of crickets. Therapy became a cornerstone, not a crutch. I started going weekly, dragging myself into the beige-carpeted office, armed with nothing but raw honesty and the desire to stop feeling broken. Sometimes I raged, sometimes I wept, sometimes I just talked about Lily and my job and the hollowness left by vanished dreams. My therapist challenged me gently. "Emma, what if your story matters? Not as a cautionary tale, but as a new beginning." I began to accept that you don't heal all at once. Sometimes healing is learning how to exist with the scars, acknowledging that even the charred earth can grow wildflowers if the sun finds just the right spot. The shame faded first, replaced by a sense of pride. I had protected Lily. I had uncovered truth and faced down the darkness. I found value again in simple moments. Grocery shopping with Lily, the hum of the coffee pot at sunrise, sitting on the porch swing, and breathing in crisp air. There were setbacks, of course. Rumors in the community flared like brush fires. There were days I dreaded school pickups or parent-teacher conferences, nights when guilt clawed me awake, and I second-guessed every decision I'd made. Every warning sign I'd brushed aside. But more and more, those moments didn't define me. I learned to forgive myself, slowly and unsteadily, a process I once thought was impossible. Professionally, too, I was forced to reinvent. Samuel had been our primary breadwinner. Now, I needed to find work to support our home. I dusted off my resume, took online courses late at night, and applied relentlessly to jobs that matched my finance background. Each interview, nerve-wracking, exhilarating, reminded me that I still had something to offer. When I landed a job as a financial analyst at a local nonprofit, I celebrated with takeout pizza on our living room floor with Lily, a victory toast of orange soda in mismatched mugs. That job, humble and unglamorous, gave me a sense of purpose that felt like a lifeline. Friendships shifted. Some people faded away, unable or unwilling to accept that the Emma they knew was gone. But the ones who stayed, or those who arrived anew, brought warmth that filled the empty rooms left by betrayal. I let myself open up about my pain, let the laughter of others stitch slowly at my sense of belonging. I learned that trust wasn't guaranteed. It was a gift, and I could give it again, carefully and on my terms. As the months passed, the house we'd shared became truly mine. I donated Samuel's suits, gave away books he'd collected. I took down wedding photos and decorated the bedroom in shades of lavender and cream. My taste, my choice. It became a refuge. On Sundays, I brewed strong coffee and wrote in a journal. I wrote about what had happened, about my fears and my hopes, and the kind of woman I wanted to become. Some days, my words were jagged and raw. On others, they shimmered with defiant hope. Slowly, I started dreaming again. Not the old dreams of perfection and suburban security, but new ones. Travel with Lily when the time was right. Maybe starting a blog to help other women struggling with similar darkness. Perhaps going back to school part-time. I wasn't just reclaiming my life. I was reimagining it from the ground up. There were new rituals and gentle joys. Movie nights on Wednesdays, pancakes for dinner if we felt like it, spontaneous adventures to parks or museums, or simply to the end of our block with Lily on her bike. I loved watching her gain confidence and delight as she realized we could build a happy life, even if it didn't look like the one we'd lost. Sometimes, late at night, I'd feel an ache, a longing for the simplicity that never really was, or for the person I'd believed Samuel to be. But it wasn't the same all-consuming pain of before. Now, I could acknowledge it, breathe through it, and let it pass. There was so much more room for gratitude, for my daughter, for the support I'd found, for my own improbable strength. Looking back, I realized that Emma from before would have never believed she could survive such devastation, let alone build a life worth loving from the ruins. But every day, in small and undramatic ways, I proved her wrong. I was doing more than surviving. I was choosing to live, a little braver, a little wiser, a little more myself. On the anniversary of the day Samuel left for prison, Lily and I baked a cake. Not a celebration exactly, but a marker of how far we'd come. We sat at the kitchen table, powdered sugar swirling in the afternoon sun, and took turns licking the spoon. "We're okay, Mama," Lily whispered, and I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, the words ringing truer than I'd dared hope months before. That night, with the house quiet and the day's work done, I looked at myself in the mirror, not as a victim, not as a survivor of betrayal, but as Emma, a woman who lost everything safe and familiar, but who had pieced together a new life, one courageous choice at a time. This was what freedom looked like. Not absence of fear, but presence of resolve. Not constant happiness, but a deeper, steadier kind of hope. If my story was carved with scars, it was also illuminated by a tenacity I never imagined possible. And so, I stepped into each new day, not waiting for disaster or apology, not tethered to sorrow, but ready for whatever came next. Because this is my life, shaped by truth, anchored in love for my daughter, and blessed, finally, by the unbreakable light I found in myself.